It's awesome to have you guys here. It's great to see this showing, and we're very lucky to have Dorien here with us, who is living in the Netherlands. In 1988, she had a blind son, and she was very active in the Dutch Association for Parents with Visually Impaired Children, almost right from the start of her son's birth. Her main topics became computer accessibility and accessible educational software. And around 2000, she started working on IT projects with the Bartimus Education for the Visually Impaired, and she did a lot of work on improving digital storybooks. So since 2011, she's worked at the National Resource Center for Adapting Reading Materials in the Netherlands with Tactile as a product manager for Braille and tactile images for students of all ages, school, vocational, and higher education and training. And she's recently helped manage and run the Tactile Reading Conference in Europe and is a international leader in the field. And it's really awesome to have you here. And so without further ado, the plan is to have about 30 to 45 minutes of your presentation and then further discussion for us to explore the ideas. So take it away.
Thank you, everybody. So now you all know me. Thank you for your kind introduction. So when I was preparing this talk, I didn't quite know who everybody was that would attend. Now I know much better. And that's great. I'm sure we're all experts in the field of tactile exploration, so I will not say too much about embodied learning or why description alone is not sufficient for proper understanding, things like that. I assume you all know. If you think I'm a bit brief on certain topics, we can catch up in the discussion afterwards. I hope to inspire you as much as Marco Sosicia did with his presentation on animation. I don't see him here. I would like to thank him. I thought it great. Unlike Marco, I will not use a PowerPoint, and I will post links to resources afterwards. I will read every now and then as to not run out of time. Okay, the title of my presentation is How Tactile Images Help Build Clear, Correct Mental Representations. And the subtitle should be In People with Severe Visual Impairment. There's one word missing actually, that is spatial. It is also about spatial mental representations, because I will talk about tactile images, but mainly focus on 3D objects that are explained through descriptions supported with tactile images. First big question, why tactile images? The answer is, I think, very simple. Blind people need images just as much as sighted people do. Hence all the illustrations, etc., in books and so on. Description alone leaves a lot to the imagination. If we want to allow blind people to form a correct mental image, mental representation of something that is three-dimensional, and reality is not available to give tactile support, then what? And often it is not. Reality is it's too big, too small. Well, we all know that, okay? Or you're not allowed to touch museums. Where's my artist? Okay, so yeah, then what? 3D models is not a bad idea. However, good replicas are not always at hand, and they may be very expensive. The 3D printed models do become more and more available and affordable, but it takes long to print them, and they take a lot of space. They don't fit in books. And you cannot sketch or draw them. Sometimes they are indispensable and very useful. I'm not against the 3D models at all, but sometimes, yeah, tactile images are just very practical. But then a tactile image that we are talking about 3D reality respects the way touch works. Now, the overall why tactile images is, of course, because if you work with tactile images, you can give access to any subject. And that leads to inclusion, participation, choice for people. What will I study? What will I learn? And develop to the fullest. As I said, I don't think I need to persuade you why tactile images and tactile media are important, but it's part of me. Okay, tactile images. That supposes two important things. First is readability, and second is understandability. Difficult word, discriminability. And it's different per technique, per medium, as you know. There are lots of specifications, for example, from Ghana, from Australia, and many more, but they are mostly for diagrams on tactile diagrams on swell paper, and there are hundreds of pages. But it's different per medium. I'm not going to say too much about it. Only beware, always test your designs. That's very important. Discriminability, yes, I did it. I always explain that to people who are not familiar with tactile images, that you can compare it with reading text. If the letters are not clear, have no good contrast, letters and other elements, you can't read the text. They must be big enough. In tactile images, the elements are lines, fillings, shapes, sometimes heights in relief. If one height covers something that's low, you can't feel well, then it's impossible to read quickly and faultlessly, just even without understanding what is drawn, but you can't feel the elements, then everything stops. The other thing is understandability. If I go on with my comparison with text, you must be following conventions, like rules, grammar, language, using words and phrases that the reader is up to. Now, that's difficult, of course. In tactile images, each domain has its own conventions. I call them underlying principles. And in order to understand them, you must be a bit savvy on the subject. Where's my math specialist? If you don't understand math or chemistry, then maybe you can read the tactile images, the diagrams, the graphs, the structure formula, but you don't know what they mean. So there's a lot of learning involved. Standardization helps, like in structure formula, but it is only possible within small margins. For example, if you have a map, Naomi knows all about maps. You can use in a certain type of map and on a certain scale, you can use standards. But as soon as you go to another scale, they often cannot be used anymore. And there must be enough space in your image to use the same things all the time. Now, when talking about 3D objects, our subject, like animals, objects, buildings, whatever 3D, the underlying principle that must be understood in order to understand the tactile image is orthogonal projection. That is something that designers know very well. It is even a standard, although there are two standards, but never mind. It is a standardized way. But here I must tell, and I assume you know how it works. So you don't use perspective, you project from above, from the front, from the side, and that's it. For designers, very easy, and I found for non-designers it can be very complex. But here I must tell a little bit of history. I was kind of educated and inspired very much by O.L. Corvest. People who have visited Tactile Reading may know her or have seen her name in the program. I met her around 2000. She is blind. She worked in the Science Museum in Paris and is now Universcience. She was and is always very frustrated if she is not able to understand precisely. She is the person who promoted the tactile images in order to be able to touch and to fully understand. She had been involved 20 years before in all researches in the field of tactile orthogonal projection, and also on guidelines for readable swell images. This was all published around 2000. One of the things she published from her work in the Science Museum was the kit Lego. That is a Lego box. It consisted of a box, a couple of Lego stones, a book with instructions to build with the Lego, but not so much to learn to build Lego as to learn orthogonal projection. And the first page explains the method. It came with a cassette. I put it in the notes. And the first page explains the method, and underneath you have an image of a Lego block with 8 dots on top. From top it's 8, and in the old-fashioned way, in the classic way of projection as it was taught in France, the top projection came to the bottom, and the front came to the back. Oh, you can't see my hands. And the projection from the left came to the right side. So at the bottom of the page, that illustration was cut out so that you could actually fold the front up and fold the side up. And so you had a little half box that you could look into with the top at the bottom, the front at the back, and the left side on the right. Remember that. This way of working was used in many publications. She promoted all over France. She organized workshops. In the museum, she was responsible for the public with a visual impairment. So she would do tours, she would make displays, she would make tactile books. So it was huge. And we cooperated on things, so she was my teacher. But she also organized workshops because she said, well, if we are to make well understandable books, everybody must speak the same language. Not only the reader must learn, but also the designers and also the mediators, the people who explain things with the help of tactile images and or who explain the tactile images. Because we know that, but I say it once again, you can't just give a tactile image to a blind person and assume that he will, we say in Holland, make chocolate of it. Veld was very active to spread the word, and as she thinks it utterly important that more well understandable tactile images soon will give access to culture, nature, science, history, more tactile images, and if possible also available, affordable tactile images. She worked together with the Louvre, that is the National School in Paris for blind students. Now it's called INSEI. It is an organization that teaches teachers, special needs teachers in France, in Paris, and many other stakeholding organizations. She retired, I think, 12 years ago, but she's still giving workshops. She has a foundation. She's still promoting tactile images and working on a very interesting art project. So she educated me. I share her view, and I did many projects to make the method known in the Netherlands. In 2012 to 2015, we did a project called Explore Your World by Touch. It was aimed at younger children in school. They learned orthogonal projection, and we also tested a lot of findings from the research that I just mentioned, that was published in 2000. So it led to improvements in the readability of tactile images as they were made in the Netherlands. One thing that was a great improvement was the use of white space or comfort space, but also other things. And in the project, we did a lot of research with children, and in the Netherlands, they were a little bit worried that this method and the tactile images were not so popular, but it proved that it all worked in the Netherlands too, not only in France. So in 2017, I initiated another project that it was called By Touch, and then you get ... double dot and then the name. And some of the books would explain concepts and others would provide accessible alternatives for inaccessible subjects in school, or they would teach special school skills like orthogonal projection. So there is a sub-series in By Touch. It's 5 books. It's a series, it's called From 3D to 2D. The first book comes with 3D models that fit in the hand. They are simple cylinders, blocks, eggs, balls, and compound forms. You can divide each figure into 2, and you can put them on the tactile projections that are in the book. So if you don't know, it's very easy to make the transition from 3D to 2D to understand what is drawn in this book. And so I used the method from the Lego kit. Yeah, it taught how do you project a cylinder, and of course, if it's standing the circle, the top view is round. If it's laying down, it's on the side. So the method also explains the position in space of the object. We tested it with 12 blind from birth people aged about 17 to 70, and some took a couple of hours, others were done within the hour. Some thought it very easy, others thought it very difficult. But all of them said, I should have learned this in primary school, then I would have been much better at math. And almost all said, okay, and now explain me how you CITES draw these objects in perspective, because they didn't know, they wanted to know, of course. It was quite a success. Then the second part is on bigger objects that will not fit in the hand anymore, and then it becomes clear why we start with the elements, with the objects in the hands. That's easy to learn, but once you have learned the method, you can go from 2D to 3D for all the things that you cannot touch, too big, too dangerous, too precious, whatever. Part 3 is on Lego. Unlike the Lego kit, it is almost higher mathematics. It also treats occlusion and other visual concepts, and also gives alternatives for school books where you have exercises like where is the photographer? It's really difficult, but it's a very good practice to learn to think spatially. So orthogonal projection stimulates spatial thinking. So in blind-born people, once that is there, we went on with part 4 and 5 with perspective. You need it when you go to a museum or wherever and you get a tactile image of the line drawing of photos or something. So you must know perspective, because if I explain such an image and I don't know how perspective works, I will not understand the explanation. And the same goes for things like shadow and other visual concepts. Then 2019, I could only work basically for students, but I managed to make 2 courses for adults for the National Library in the Netherlands. 2 courses and also additional workshops. And I gave some of them, and it was really fun and was quite good. They followed the same structure, so first orthogonal projection, and after that perspective and shadow. Although I must say, many adult people never learned to work with tactile images. They learned in school, sometimes long ago, sometimes less long ago. And after that, never had any practice, and they really needed to practice tactile discrimination first, and practice that with 2D objects. So that was added. Now, you know quite a lot of tools. I think we all in all have almost 80 books now. Okay, so despite the good results and the positive reactions when I gave workshops from the people who had these aha moments, that's what's making me happy when people say, now I understand. Oh, so despite these good results, orthogonal projection was not really embraced in the Netherlands in Dutch education. And in one of the last projects I did, that was Project Tacticos, I worked together very closely with itinerant teachers, teachers from the Netherlands, and I started to understand why. I found that they were very often confused with this classic method of orthogonal projection. As I told you, the top view is at the bottom, the front view is complex. That was confusing for them. So despite the photo in the Lego kit and despite my touch and everything, they wouldn't embrace it. Therefore, in Roundy, I shifted the position of the views. So the top came on top, the front came on front, and the side came on the side. Moreover, that made a bit of a difference. Bit by bit, orthogonal projection did get more accepted and even a little bit popular. But the real breakthrough, and that's almost the end of my presentation, came this year. I gave workshops because I was leaving Dedicon. I was giving workshops to the employees in Dedicon, the teachers at Bartimeus and Visio, the Institutes for Education for the Visually Impaired, and I showed and explained orthogonal projection with the new positions. And I stressed, you saw me do this quite a few times, I stressed the hand movements because I said, I don't need to explain to you, movement, touch helps you to incorporate what you learn, you remember it much better, you understand it much better. We actually also had that as research results in Can Explore Your World by Touch. And I also made them make the movements. And then I gave them a sheet of paper and I made them draw a Lego block in a specific position in the quadrants. So we folded the page, we had 4 quadrants, and then I gave them scissors and I let them cut out the one quadrant that in this method we don't use. So that's gone. Then I had them fold the left quadrants into a half box. So there all the views were in the right position. Now that is embodied learning. They got it. They understood. So it was quite nice. And in Hansi, I continue now. Oh yeah, Hansi, sorry, I started a small enterprise. There's a website under construction, and today I got my first order as a designer. I've learned myself to draw from a museum. In Hansi, I continue this work for a wider public, and I also hope to cooperate with Tactile Media Alliance. I renamed the method, by the way. I speak of 2D, from 2D to 3D, and they form the first 2 levels of the method. 3rd and 4th are perspective, and last is art. So I hope to work together with TMA because there is still a lot to learn. There's still a lot to exchange. And at Tactile Reading, I had taken the initiative of 2 table talks to get people together who want to bring things to a further level. One is affordability and availability of tactile images and tactile books. I hope to bring that under the umbrella of the Tactile Media Alliance, orthogonal projection, or maybe I should say from 2D to 3D. Things that with so many researchers at hand would be interesting, I think, is to see if we can train AI to draw, to make good descriptions and things like that, or maybe find a way to better give guidelines for different materials, because there is still very much we don't know about touch. If I can't see properly, maybe not sharp, I have glasses. I can correct that. I can have hearing aids, but who knows what you feel when you touch something. Is that 100%? So there's lots and lots of interesting questions to work on. So thank you for your bearing with me. I hope you liked it.
Thank you very much, Dorien. Yep. Would anybody like to start with a question? I have many. I'll just say one thing I really appreciate is this being a bit of a retrospective. It helps us start to establish our history, right? And it makes me think about the importance of whether it's nationally or continentally, thinking about how are our fields adapting and shifting and starting to anticipate new technologies. I think it's important for us to be looking back at where the knowledge base is coming from and your personal experience, but then how you've brought that into the professional world and are now becoming an entrepreneur yourself, a design entrepreneur in yourself. I just want to acknowledge that and say, in your mind, how do you think we can really start to build these kind of regional histories as you've done in your sharing about Ovele and that relationship?
How can we?
I'm just thinking about how, in your mind, how do we start to build these regional histories so that we can start to really understand the cultural significance of each region's development of tactile literacy and tactile understanding and tactile design?
Yeah, when we had the Tacticus project, we had people from France, from the Netherlands, and from Belgium. And in these three countries, the culture was already very different, and it really took a while before we communicated effectively and really understood each other. So yes, Abby, that is an interesting question. I think that there is only one solution here, and that is discussing, that is working together. In Tacticus, by working together, we discovered that we thought we understood each other, but in fact, we did not quite. That was very interesting. I think cooperating, I think Tactile Media Alliance is a perfect platform to bring that about, to start that understanding that historical awareness, cultural awareness.
Thank you.
Dorien, this is Anne Cunningham.
Hi,
Anne.
Anne.
Thank you so much for this. This is great. I took lots of notes. I really appreciate your time and all your information. I was wondering if you could you said in book 4 that you were working on perspective. I'm just curious about what the perspective concepts are that you found useful to teach.
Yeah, I have not very much had a chance to teach it actually, because the workshops that were done for adults in the Netherlands were mainly for beginners. But there is a lot of interest. So I'm very curious myself if it will work. Okay, what concepts are in that book and what concepts are in the books for children? Because children, young people. In the books for the young children, it is very much like, okay, where are you standing? What are you seeing? And then you can work with sightlines, with ropes, mapping what is within the frame. And then when you know orthogonal projection, you can also explain the positions. For the adult people, I made it a little bit more, I gave a little bit more theory. I also explain the different types of parallel perspective. And this is really an eye-opener also for the sighted companions. I also work with sighted companions. They are very welcome because then they firsthand learn what the blind people, how they react and how they perceive it. So yeah, the sighted people in the course said, I never realized that there were so many rules. And I said, okay, but if I ask you to make a perspective drawing, they thought that difficult. So passively, they had mastered that. Of course, we see the whole day, so perspective has no secrets. But as soon as you have to draw it, it's if you're not trained, it's pretty difficult. And also, it made people realize, I've been talking in my presentation about underlying principles, that in fact this also is a very important underlying principle. You must understand it in order to be able to work with the tactile images. And also they had never really realized that you have perspective to show this or perspective to show, I don't need to go into detail to show that. And so you choose Cavalier or isometric or whatever for a reason. So that was very funny. And then also, of course, I work with vanishing points. And there I try to make it a bit interesting. I grab back to Dürer and, probably these paintings and what's the English word? Gravures? Yeah, etchings, whatever, for where he has a frame and with ropes makes a projection on. That's actually what we do in the course too. With a book, very simple, because otherwise it gets too complex. But with ropes again, so we project a book on a screen. And this is, for all participants, fun to do, interesting, leads to a lot of discussion, questions. And that's one of the things what I like very much about working with tactile images. It always leads to to asking questions. Hey, what is this? Hey, what is that? From children to adults. Nice conversations. It leads to curiosity. It's really fun to work with tactile images.
Thank you.
I mean, for you, but for everybody in the group, we're making these artifacts, we're building prototypes, we're testing them, we're testing these kind of theories. Oftentimes they end up just on our computers. We're starting to see more repositories. I think a question for our community is really, how do we start to make them available? How do we handle intellectual property of the resources while continuing to build this learning content in ways that researchers can pick up and apply, or that has been validated through research and can then be used to help build a business and actually have profit so that we can sustain our livelihoods in this work. I think that's one of the goals and the missions of the Tactile Media Alliance, is to work together to solve this and make sure that we're connecting the resources. Like, I remember being at your studio this summer in the Netherlands and seeing your incredible books that you've been making, and with the Lego project and the different orthogonal projections, and just wanting to bring them with me. Are people finding in terms of distributing their content in more accessible, affordable ways?
Yeah,
and that's for everybody.
Yeah, but that's pretty difficult. So I think it's often a pity that there is, despite the long history, it's very difficult to find a good tactile image about something that you are interested in, something that suits your needs. And the less we share, the more expensive everything becomes. And so availability will not really grow. I think that's attention. So I would say if subsidized organizations develop interesting and usable things, they should, like open source, like the GNU copyright, should share for not commercial use and for the benefit of, then that should. But I am actually curious about one thing. I've been advocating for using and learning orthogonal projection. And how far is that in your practice an issue?
The projection?
Orthogonal projection.
Yeah, this is Anne. If I could jump in. We've used it a lot at the science summer camps that we've done at National Federation of the Blind. And we've done about 5 years of those, I think. It's like a week long. And about 30 students come from all over the United States, and they're all in high school, and they all have some sort of visual blindness.
Yeah.
And so what they need to do is, for a couple of years, we were building boats out of pipe and duct tape and blue tarps. So the students each had teams, and they had to design their boat. They had to test. They had tests beforehand. And part of the thing was they had to draw an orthogonal projection of their boat design, and then isometric perspective. So we taught both of those. Yeah.
Perfect. That's one thing. So drawing in the Netherlands was not used very often. So when my son was at school, he would draw with pins and rubber bands. That was it. There were no drawing sets, etc. So finally, I think some 5, 6, 7 years ago, the value of drawing, there was a project by Visio, and they realized how important it is to draw yourself.
Yeah. So my husband makes sensational blackboards. And so we made larger ones so that they fit on drafting tables. And so that students could use that. And so they had the tools that they really needed to be able to draw good and metric images.
We have here the entrepreneur Leider with Thinkable, who makes Tactile, the device where you can put objects in certain directions, so as to learn perspective. Yes.
Yeah, these are a little bigger. They're like regular size.
I feel we must go on afterwards.
So
I
see that we have time for one more question. I see Ronnie, your hand is up.
Yeah.
Let's take that and then we'll adjourn.
Thanks a lot, Dorien, for your presentation. What it is for most important, the principal design for educational designer with blind students?
What is the most important
Principal
design?
Yes, the most important principal design.
Yeah, it depends on in what domain you are, but if you are talking about 3D objects, I really believe in the importance of orthogonal projection, not using perspectives, since that deforms angles and lengths and shapes, and also for people who are very late blind, or if I blindfold some of you who can see now, you will find that if I give you perspective drawings, tactile perspective, it's very hard to recognize what they are. If you don't know what they are, chance that you will guess are very small.
Yes, you can differ, for example, between difference in the exploration and haptic, tactile interaction with object in the different reserves.
Ronnie, these are great. These are really great questions. And I think that we are still learning to kind of translate across the modalities. And it really, in my mind, has to do with, again, the individual, the context in which they're learning, and also the kind of task or the sequence of the task that they're wanting to do in determining kind of whether you're wanting all the information presented kind of all at once, or when kind of tactile aspects come in. So perhaps that's a topic that we can continue to discuss, this notion of amodality, panmodality, cross-modality. We've talked about that a little bit in the past, but I think it's something that we continue to have questions about. And so maybe in our next meeting, we can have an open conversation about that. And just to wrap up, because I have to run to teach class, next meeting, let's keep this as an open topic. Let's bring this topic back into the conversation. I will share out a paper that I think, Dor, you had shared recently around some embodied concepts around this, and from a few months ago. And then in January, we have Ian Batty and and their work around designing Braille and different applications of Braille for 3D printing, and their application of those technologies for designing museum content as well. So, and then looking ahead to 2026, it's crazy to think that's the fact. We have 12 spots for 12 speakers. So if anybody is interested in speaking and sharing their work, and please do let me know. And Dorien, can we reach out to you via email? Can I share your email for people who have further questions?
Sure.
Okay, I'll follow up with the folks that are in this group to share your email. Thanks everybody for attending, and Dorien, for your energy and your lifelong commitment to this work. It's really inspiring.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, Dorien.
Thank you, Dorien.
It was great.
Thank you, Dorien.
Thank you, Dorien.
Bye.